There's one thing. Okay, so one thing that immediately comes to mind um, requires just a little bit of setup. So, uh, some number of years ago, so this was like 2000, I was living in an artist loft in LA. So, in this big space that had this metal staircase that went up to a loft area where the kitchen was. And I was living there with two cats, Atticus and Harriet. And when Atticus was a kitten, his favorite thing to do was run up and down the steps in the house that I was living in then and be chased. So it's like every night when he was little, he wanted to be chased up and down the steps. So now he's a much older cat, but still, likes the game. And I'm living in this other place, and he starts jumping up from wherever he's sleeping in the evenings and running up and down this metal staircase like someone is chasing him. And it wasn't me. I wasn't like, and it didn't, at this point, it had been years, you know what I mean? And I'm like, and I would say to him, what are you doing? Like, who are you playing with or whatever? And so this went on for a while. And at the same time, a friend told me about this chiropractor who also sometimes like was a psychic who also sometimes channeled things. And I was getting ready to do some big things or whatever. And I thought, well, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen, but I go to this other chiropractor. I mean, I made an appointment with this guy. And I thought, well, whatever. So I go, I make the appointment, I go, we meet, he's like, why are you here? And I tell him, my back. So, in the course of the treatment, which was very subtle, he was like just mostly just had his hands on my back. At a point, he stops with his hands on my back and then he goes, do you know anyone named Henry? And I said, well, the only Henry I've ever known was my grandfather, and he has been dead for more than 10 years. And this chiropractor's name is Daniel. Daniel says to me, well, Henry is here and has some things to say to you, and I mean, I'm pretty open-minded about things, but I think skepticism is an important part of that, right? Like I'd like to think I'm not gullible. And so, I'm thinking, all right, I'm sorry. This is like, I'm not sure, I can't explain how this guy could have pulled the name Henry out, but, and so I said, oh, okay, is that so? And then he says to me, yeah, so your grandfather, I mean, for one thing, he wants you to know you are living a very interesting life, and he loves playing with your cat, Atticus, on the stairs. Okay. Now I'm face down on the table. So, you know, and I am like freaking out. And so then he went on, and then he goes on and he tells me some things, including one thing that I remember. He said, you drive too fast and you need to be more careful driving. And he told me a couple things about my mom. And at a point, I said, he was like, do you have any questions for me? And I said, well, how is this happening? Like, where are you? And Daniel says to me, this is like, there's not any way really to communicate what this is going on. Like he can kind of send me some impressions, but it's like all circuits blowing. I don't really, all I can say is that um, he's had things to do here on this plane. And it's a much more complicated what happens after death than many of us realize. So, yeah. And so then, so that was kind of the end of the conversation. And then when I got off the table, by the time I got off the table, I was in a, a different state of presence. Like I don't know if you've ever done any holotropic breath work or like anything that like really suddenly where you suddenly it's like, oh, this is what actually being fully present in the moment is like. At least I'm getting to do it for a little while. Yeah, that's where I was, and that lasted for about a day. Now, the last part of this story is that so he continued to run with the cat. And so then I would just say hello to him. And not that long after that, I moved to the desert near to Joshua Tree, California, which is where I lived for quite a long time. And there were no steps there or anything. And Atticus, unfortunately, died very unexpectedly. Yeah, but then I would go hiking in the desert, and there were a couple of spots standing up high where I would go up high and be like looking out over everything. And I could feel my grandfather there. At this point, he'd been around enough and I'd talked to him enough. Yeah. And I would just stand up there and, talk to him. And that happened a number of times. And then at a point, I noticed I was like, he's gone. I could feel it. And I have not been aware of him being in my life since then, like around with me here.